My name is Rachel Martinez, and I'm a fraud investigator for Meridian Insurance Company here in Phoenix. After 8 years of catching people who lie for money, you'd think I'd be harder to fool. You'd think I'd see betrayal coming from a mile away. But sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who know exactly how to stay invisible. Last Tuesday morning, I was finishing my third cup of coffee when I noticed them. 2 figures in navy suits standing beside my desk on the 4th floor. Corporate badges gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and each carried identical black portfolios. The woman was photographing my computer monitor, while her partner methodically searched through my filing cabinet, wearing latex gloves, like I was contaminated. My coffee went cold in my hands. After 8 years of conducting these exact same inspections on other people, I recognized the choreography immediately. This was a compliance investigation, and I was the target. I approached slowly, forcing my expression to remain neutral. "Can I help you with something?" The taller investigator straightened his badge, reading Senior Inspector Chen. His voice carried that practiced monotone, reserved for delivering bad news. "Rachel Martinez, we're here regarding an anonymous complaint filed against you. Allegations of evidence tampering and client fraud." Anonymous. The word hit me like ice water. I didn't need 3 guesses to know who'd filed that complaint. 30 feet away, pretending to be absorbed in her computer screen, sat Madison Walsh, my supervisor's niece. The same Madison who'd started here 6 months ago with 0 experience, but infinite confidence. The same Madison who made it crystal clear she believed my position should belong to someone with the right last name. I set my coffee down carefully and nodded. "Go ahead. You won't find anything because there's nothing to find." But even as I said it, my hands trembled slightly. Not from guilt. I'd never cut a corner in my life. I trembled because I knew exactly how far Madison had been willing to go to get what she wanted. Madison Walsh and I had been oil and water from day one. She swept into our department like she owned it, interrupting client meetings to clarify points I'd already explained perfectly. She'd drop her uncle's name, Senior Vice President Walsh, in casual conversation, making sure everyone remembered who held the real power around here. What grated on me most wasn't her arrogance. It was her incompetence. Madison confused basic fraud indicators, mixed up client files, and somehow always managed to pin her mistakes on the confusing systems I'd supposedly explained poorly. Meanwhile, I'd spent 8 years building a reputation for thoroughness. My case closure rate was the highest in the department. My client testimonials spoke for themselves, but reputation doesn't matter when someone with connections decides you're in their way. The investigators continued their silent work. Inspector Chen photographed my desk setup, while his partner, Inspector Park, examined every document in my files. They moved with mechanical precision, occasionally exchanging meaningful glances that made everyone in the office nervous. I stood with my arms crossed, watching. Inside, my thoughts raced. This is it. She finally did it. Months of subtle sabotage, whispered concerns about my irregular methods, inconvenient memory lapses when clients complained about delays. Madison had been building toward this moment. I caught her stealing a glance in my direction. She was highlighting something on a printout, but her eyes kept flicking up to gauge my reaction. She wasn't even trying to hide her satisfaction. The strange thing was, I wasn't angry. I should have been humiliated standing there, while strangers treated me like a criminal. Instead, I felt an odd sense of calm settling over me, because Madison had no idea what kind of trap she'd just walked into. You see, when you investigate fraud for a living, you develop certain habits. You document everything. You keep backups. You notice patterns that other people miss. And over the past 6 months, I'd been noticing Madison's patterns very carefully. Inspector Park pulled something from my bottom desk drawer, a manila folder I'd never seen before. He flipped it open, frowned, and called his partner over. They huddled together, whispering rapidly, while examining whatever they'd found. My chest tightened. Yesterday, that drawer had contained nothing but office supplies and my emergency granola bars. Today, apparently, it held evidence of crimes I'd never committed. Ms. Martinez, Inspector Chen said finally, his tone sharpening. We need to discuss the contents of this file. Conference room, please. As we walked toward the glass-walled meeting room, I could feel every pair of eyes in the office following us. My colleagues would be whispering already. Rachel's finally been caught. The golden girl wasn't so clean after all. But I knew something they didn't. Something Madison had overlooked in her rush to frame me. When you spend your career investigating other people's lies, you learn to cover your own tracks pretty thoroughly. And more importantly, you learn to recognize when someone else isn't covering theirs. Madison thought she was watching my career implode. What she didn't realize was that she'd just lit the fuse on her own destruction. Inside the sterile conference room, Inspector Chen placed the mystery folder on the table like evidence in a murder trial. Inspector Park closed the blinds while I took a seat across from them, my hands steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Ms. Martinez, Chen began opening the folder. Can you explain how these documents ended up in your personal workspace? I leaned forward to examine the contents. My blood ran cold. Inside were printed emails with my signature investigative reports, with fabricated findings and handwritten notes describing suspicious claim approvals I'd allegedly rubber-stamped. Every document was dated within the past month, and each one painted me as either incompetent or corrupt. I've never seen any of this before, I said evenly. None of these documents originated from my work. Park raised an eyebrow. They were found in your locked desk drawer. My drawer doesn't lock, I replied. None of the desk drawers in our department do. Security removed the locks last year during the office renovation. The investigators exchanged glances. Chen made a note on his pad. I studied the fabricated reports more carefully. Someone had done their homework. The formatting matched our internal templates perfectly, and the case numbers referenced real claims I'd handled. But there were subtle inconsistencies that jumped out at me. Wrong client addresses, approval dates that fell on weekends when our systems are offline for maintenance, and most tellingly, handwriting that definitely wasn't mine. These notes, I said, pointing to the handwritten comments scattered throughout. I don't write in cursive, ever. It's in my training file. I print everything in block capitals because my cursive is illegible. Chen studied the looping script more closely. Are you suggesting someone forged these? I'm stating it as a fact. Meanwhile, 3 days earlier, Madison had been busy laying groundwork. I was only now beginning to understand. She'd started arriving early, staying late, and finding excuses to be near my desk when I stepped away for coffee or bathroom breaks. I'd assumed she was trying to learn the job. Now I realized she'd been learning something else entirely. My routines, my methods, my vulnerabilities. But Madison had made one crucial error. She thought she was the only one paying attention. She thought I was too focused on my work to notice her hovering. She was wrong. 6 weeks ago, I'd started noticing small inconsistencies in my digital case files. Documents that didn't match my memory of how I'd left them. Client notes with timestamps that didn't align with my calendar. Nothing dramatic enough to raise alarms, just tiny discrepancies that nagged at me. So I'd started taking screenshots. daily backups of my active cases, digital breadcrumbs that would let me reconstruct exactly what I'd worked on and when. It was a habit born from paranoia, but paranoia was about to pay dividends. "Gentlemen," I said, pulling out my phone, "I'd like to request that I pull the access logs for my workstation. Specifically, login attempts when my badge shows I was off-site." Chen looked intrigued. "You think someone accessed your account, unauthorized?" "I think someone's been very busy trying to make me look guilty. But they left digital fingerprints everywhere." The investigation expanded over the next 2 hours. Inspector Park contacted IT while Chen walked me through each fabricated document, asking detailed questions about my actual work on those cases. By lunchtime, a clearer picture was emerging. The real versions of every suspicious report existed in our system, complete with proper approvals and documentation. The fake versions in the folder contained errors so obvious that any competent investigator would have caught them immediately. Someone was trying very hard to make me look either corrupt or incompetent. "There's something else," I told the investigators. 3 weeks ago, I received a client complaint about delayed processing on a claim I'd never seen before. When I checked our system, the case had been opened under my login credentials during my lunch break. I was at a dental appointment across town. Chen's eyebrows shot up. "Did you report this?" "To my supervisor, yes. I was told it was probably a system glitch and not to worry about it." What I didn't mention was that my supervisor was Madison's uncle, the same man who'd hired his inexperienced niece, despite her complete lack of qualifications. The same man who'd been steering the easiest cases her direction while loading me up with the complex, time-consuming investigations that made my productivity numbers look questionable. By 2 p.m., Inspector Park returned with printouts from IT. His expression was grim as he spread the documents across the conference table. "Ms. Martinez, your login credentials were used to access the system 47 times in the past month, when your badge showed you were either off-site or logged into a different workstation." My heart pounded. 47 times. Chen studied the logs. "The unauthorized access consistently occurred from workstation 47B. That's Madison Walsh's desk," I finished. "Right next to mine." The three of us sat in silence as the implications sank in. Madison hadn't just planted evidence. She'd been actively sabotaging my work for weeks, maybe months. Every mysterious system glitch, every client complaint about delays, every case that seemed to develop problems overnight. It had all been her. But the investigators weren't done. Inspector Park pulled out another folder, this one containing security camera footage timestamps. "We also requested surveillance footage from the past week," he said, "particularly focusing on access to your desk area during non-business hours." He slid several grainy printouts across the table. Even in low resolution, the images were clear enough. A figure in a familiar camel-colored coat leaning over my desk at 6:43 p.m. last Monday. The same coat Madison had worn to work that day. "That's not me," I said unnecessarily. Chen nodded. "We know. You badged out at 5:15 p.m. that day. Building security confirms you never returned." As the evidence mounted, I felt a mixture of vindication and dread. Vindication because my innocence was being proven beyond doubt. Dread because I was beginning to understand just how far Madison and her uncle had been willing to go. The trap they'd set for me was elaborate, methodical, and would have been devastating if it had worked. My career would have been destroyed. My reputation in the industry would have been ruined. 8 years of building trust with clients and colleagues, gone. But they'd underestimated me. They thought I was just another obstacle to be removed. They didn't realize I was someone who made a living catching people who thought they were smarter than the system. Ms. Martinez, Inspector Chen said, finally closing his folder. We're going to need to expand this investigation. What started as a complaint against you has become something much larger. I nodded, feeling the weight of what was coming next. Madison's plan to destroy me had backfired spectacularly. Now the question was how many other people were involved, and how deep did this conspiracy go? As we prepared to leave the conference room, I caught sight of Madison through the glass walls. She was pretending to work at her desk, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing toward our meeting room. She knew something was wrong, but she had no idea how wrong it was about to get. The next morning arrived with an email that made my blood freeze. Madison had spent the night covering her tracks, but instead of making herself look innocent, she'd made everything worse. At 11:47 p.m. the previous evening, someone using her credentials had attempted to delete 17 case files from the shared server, all cases I'd worked on in the past month. The IT logs were definitive: Madison's login, Madison's workstation, and most damning of all, Madison's biometric authorization for each deletion attempt. But our server backups had saved everything, and the deletion attempts had triggered automatic security alerts that went straight to corporate security. Inspector Chen called me at 7 a.m. Rachel, we need you to come in early today. Don't use your normal entrance. Meet us in the parking garage on level B2. When I arrived, I found not just Chen and Park, but 3 additional investigators I didn't recognize. The scope of this investigation had clearly expanded overnight. Ms. Martinez, Chen began. We've discovered evidence that suggests this case involves multiple violations of federal fraud statutes. The attempted evidence destruction last night elevated this to a potential criminal matter. My stomach dropped. Criminal matter meant FBI involvement. It meant careers destroyed and people going to prison. What had started as workplace sabotage was spiraling into something much more serious. But there was more. Inspector Park opened a new folder. We've been reviewing your supervisor's case assignments over the past 6 months. There's a clear pattern of steering high-value claims away from experienced investigators like you and toward less qualified staff members. He showed me a spreadsheet that made the favoritism impossible to deny. Madison had been assigned nothing but simple, straightforward claims that practically processed themselves. Meanwhile, I'd been buried under complex investigations that required weeks of work, making my productivity stats look terrible in comparison. It gets worse, Chen added. We found email communications between Madison Walsh and her uncle discussing your caseload and performance metrics. They've been deliberately setting you up to fail. The conspiracy was bigger than I'd imagined. This wasn't just a spoiled niece trying to steal my job. It was a coordinated effort involving senior management to manufacture grounds for my termination. But then Inspector Park delivered the knockout punch. Rachel, we need to ask you about the Hartwell claim, case number 2847B. I felt my blood turn to ice. The Hartwell case was a $2.3 million life insurance claim I'd investigated 3 months ago. The beneficiary was the deceased's young wife, and something about her story hadn't added up. I'd recommended denying the claim pending further investigation. What about it? I asked carefully. According to our records, you changed your recommendation to approved for full payout on September 15th. The claim was processed the same day. My mouth went dry. That's impossible. I never changed my recommendation. In fact, I submitted additional evidence suggesting potential fraud just last week. The investigators exchanged those meaningful glances again. Chen opened yet another folder. The approval came from your login credentials at 3:22 a.m. on September 15th. But according to building security, you weren't in the office that night. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Madison hadn't just been sabotaging my small cases. She'd been approving fraudulent claims worth millions of dollars, using my credentials to hide her tracks. "Sigh, gentlemen," I said, my voice barely steady. "I think we need to review every high-value claim that's been processed in the past 6 months. Every single one." What we discovered over the next 4 hours made my stomach churn. 7 claims, totaling over $8 million, had been approved, using my credentials during times when I could prove I wasn't in the building. Each approval had been preceded by Madison's uncle reassigning the cases to me, and followed by Madison accessing my account to process the paperwork. They weren't just trying to get me fired. They were using me as cover for a massive fraud scheme. But there was one thing they hadn't counted on. My obsessive documentation habits had created a perfect timeline of my actual work. Every legitimate investigation I'd conducted, every real recommendation I'd made, every hour I'd spent on genuine cases. It was all backed up with timestamps, photos, and detailed notes. I pulled out my personal laptop and showed the investigators my backup files. "This is what I actually worked on," I said, opening folder after folder of screenshots and documentation. Every case, every decision, every hour logged. And none of it matches what's in your official records. Inspector Chen studied my files with growing amazement. "Rachel, you realize what this means. You've documented proof of systematic fraud going back months. This isn't just about workplace sabotage anymore. This is organized crime." The weight of it hit me like a physical blow. I'd thought Madison was just a spoiled brat trying to steal my job. But she and her uncle had been running a sophisticated fraud operation, and they'd chosen me as their fall guy. When the scheme inevitably collapsed, all evidence would point to me as the corrupt investigator who'd approved millions in fraudulent claims. It was brilliant, ruthless, and would have been absolutely devastating if it had worked. But they'd made one fatal error. They'd underestimated the very person whose job it was to catch schemes exactly like theirs. I lived and breathed fraud investigation. I knew every trick, every red flag, every way criminals try to cover their tracks. And now I was about to turn all that expertise against them. "Inspector Chen," I said, closing my laptop, "I want to help you catch them. All of them. But first, we need to make sure they don't destroy any more evidence." He nodded grimly. "Agreed. As of right now, this investigation is moving into active surveillance mode. Madison Walsh and her uncle don't know we're onto them yet. Let's keep it that way until we can gather everything we need." I looked through the conference room windows toward Madison's desk. She was typing furiously, probably wondering why I hadn't been arrested yet. Her confidence was about to become her downfall. The trap she'd set for me was about to snap shut on her instead. And unlike her amateur hour frame job, my investigation was going to be thorough, documented, and absolutely bulletproof. The next 48 hours tested every ounce of self-control I possessed. While corporate security gathered evidence and built their case, I had to return to my normal routine, pretending nothing had changed. I sat at my desk, processed my cases, and made small talk with colleagues, all while knowing that Madison was watching my every move, waiting for me to crack. But the most difficult part wasn't maintaining my facade. It was discovering just how deep the betrayal went. Inspector Chen called me at home Wednesday evening with news that made my hands shake. "Rachel, we've been analyzing the financial records. The money from those fraudulent claims didn't just disappear. It was systematically funneled through a network of shell companies, and some of your colleagues may have been involved." My heart sank. "Who?" "We're still confirming, but there are irregularities in case assignments going back 2 years. This appears to be much bigger than Madison and her uncle. Thursday morning, I arrived at work to find the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations stopped when I walked by. Colleagues who had been friendly for years suddenly found excuses to avoid me. Someone had been spreading rumors, and I had a pretty good idea who. During my lunch break, I overheard Madison in the break room, voice carrying just loud enough to be heard by the small crowd gathered around her. "I feel terrible for Rachel," she was saying, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "But when someone's been cutting corners for years, eventually it catches up with them. The compliance investigation is just getting started. I heard they found evidence of systematic fraud." My coworker Janet shook her head sadly. "I can't believe it. Rachel always seemed so ethical." "That's what makes it so shocking," Madison replied. "The quiet ones are often the worst. All that overtime she claimed to be working. She was probably covering her tracks." I stepped into the break room, and the conversation died instantly. Madison looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Oh, Rachel, I hope everything works out okay with your investigation." "I'm sure it will," I said quietly, pouring myself coffee with steady hands. "The truth has a way of surfacing eventually." Madison's smile flickered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "Of course. I'm sure it's all just a misunderstanding." What she didn't know was that I was wearing a wire. Every word of her performance was being recorded by corporate security. Every lie, every bit of character assassination, every attempt to poison my reputation, all of it was going directly to the investigators building a case against her. That afternoon brought the darkest moment of all. Inspector Chen pulled me aside with information that nearly broke me. "Rachel, we've discovered that the Hartwell claim, the $2.3 million life insurance payout, was approved 3 days after you submitted evidence proving it was fraudulent. Your supervisor had your report, knew it was fraud, and processed the claim anyway." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I had done everything right. I had caught the fraud, documented the evidence, followed every protocol, and my supervisor, Madison's uncle, had taken my work and used it to approve an even bigger theft. "There's more," Chen continued. "Mrs. Hartwell, the beneficiary, is Madison's college roommate. This wasn't random fraud. It was a coordinated scheme involving multiple parties." I sat in stunned silence as the full scope of their operation became clear. Madison hadn't just been sabotaging my work. She'd been using my reputation and expertise as cover for a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Every fraud I caught and reported had been approved anyway, with the money flowing to her network of accomplices. They had turned me into an unwitting accomplice in my own professional destruction. But the worst revelation was yet to come. Inspector Park showed me internal emails between Madison and her uncle discussing not just my caseload, but my personal life, my habits, even my financial situation. "They've been planning this for almost a year," Park explained. "Your supervisor specifically recruited Madison because they needed someone inside the department who could access your work and manipulate the case assignments." The emails were clinical in their cruelty. They discussed me like I was a resource to be exploited, a reputation to be harvested for their criminal purposes. Madison's uncle had written, "Rachel's credibility is our most valuable asset. Her fraud detection skills make her the perfect cover. When this eventually unravels, all evidence will point to her as either corrupt or incompetent. Either way, she takes the fall." I excused myself to the bathroom and allowed myself exactly 2 minutes to fall apart, 2 minutes to feel the full weight of how completely I'd been used and betrayed, 2 minutes to grieve for the career and reputation they'd tried to steal from me. Then I washed my face, straightened my shoulders, and walked back out to finish what we'd started. because they had made one crucial mistake in their assessment of me. I wasn't just a fraud investigator. I was the best fraud investigator in the company. I had spent 8 years learning to think like a criminal, to anticipate their moves, to follow money trails, and uncover conspiracies. And now I was about to use every single one of those skills to destroy them. "Inspector Chen," I said, returning to the conference room, "I want to set a trap, a sting operation that will force them to reveal the full scope of their network." He looked intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" I smiled for the first time in days. "I want to give them exactly what they think they want, a chance to frame me for one final massive fraud. But this time, we'll be watching every move they make." It was time to turn the tables. Madison thought she was hunting me, but she was about to discover that she had become the prey. The trap I designed was elegant in its simplicity. Inspector Chen and I created a fake case file for a fictional $3.2 million insurance claim, the kind of high-value target Madison's network couldn't resist. We made sure the file would cross my desk with all the right red flags to attract their attention. Then we waited. I didn't have to wait long. Friday morning, I deliberately left the fake file on my desk and went to a medical appointment across town, making sure to badge out clearly through building security. By the time I returned 3 hours later, corporate security had filmed Madison accessing my computer, photographing the case details, and sending encrypted messages to her uncle and at least 3 other accomplices. The beautiful part was that they thought they were being careful. They used coded language in their communications, deleted emails, immediately after sending them, and coordinated their timing to avoid detection. What they didn't realize was that corporate security had been monitoring all their communications for days, recording every deletion, every encrypted message, every careful coordination attempt. Monday morning brought the reckoning. I arrived at work to find the office buzzing with tension. Security guards stood at strategic positions throughout the floor, and several desks sat empty. Madison's cubicle was cleared out completely, and her uncle's corner office was dark. Inspector Chen appeared at my desk at exactly 9 a.m. "Rachel, could you join us in conference room A? There are some people who'd like to meet you." Inside the room, I found not just Chen and Park, but FBI agent Sarah Rodriguez and Assistant District Attorney Michael Thompson. The investigation had officially become a federal case. "Ms. Martinez," Agent Rodriguez began, "thanks to your cooperation and documentation, we've uncovered one of the most sophisticated insurance fraud rings in the state's history. Over the past 18 months, this network has stolen approximately $47 million through fraudulent claims processed using your credentials." The number hit me like a physical blow. $47 million. They had used my reputation to steal almost $50 million, and I would have been the one facing federal prison time when it all came crashing down. Ada Thompson leaned forward. "The evidence you provided, your backup files, documentation habits, timeline records, that's what broke this case wide open. Without your obsessive record keeping, we never would have been able to prove the fraud or identify all the players involved." Over the next hour, they laid out the full scope of what they'd uncovered. Madison and her uncle were just the tip of the iceberg. The network included claims, adjusters, medical professionals, lawyers, and even a few judges who'd been paid to expedite settlements. It was a criminal enterprise that had been operating for years, flying under the radar by using reputable employees like me as unwitting cover. Madison Walsh was arrested at her apartment this morning. Agent Rodriguez continued, along with her uncle and 7 other co-conspirators. The charges include wire fraud, money laundering conspiracy, and identity theft. They're looking at decades in federal prison. But the story wasn't over yet. There was one final twist that nobody had seen coming. Inspector Park opened a folder I hadn't seen before. "Rachel, there's something else. When we searched Madison's apartment, we found files on 12 other insurance investigators across the country. She and her uncle weren't just targeting you. They were running similar operations in multiple states using experienced investigators as cover for systematic fraud. The scope of it was breathtaking. Madison's fumbling, incompetent persona had been completely fake. She was actually a sophisticated criminal who'd been recruited specifically for her ability to infiltrate insurance companies and identify valuable targets. Her uncle had been the operational mastermind, but Madison had been the one with the technical skills to manipulate systems and forge documents. The other investigators they targeted weren't as lucky as you, Agent Rodriguez explained. 3 of them are currently facing criminal charges because they didn't have the documentation to prove their innocence. Your obsessive record-keeping didn't just save your career. It probably saved you from spending the next 20 years in federal prison. That afternoon, I sat in my supervisor's old office. My office now, as it turned out. The company had offered me a promotion to department head as both compensation for what I'd endured and recognition of the skills that had helped uncover the conspiracy. The corner office felt surreal, like someone else's dream. But the real satisfaction came from the calls I'd been receiving all day. Other insurance investigators around the country, people who'd been targeted by similar schemes, reaching out for advice. The FBI wanted me to consult on related cases. The industry media wanted interviews. I'd gone from being a target of destruction to being recognized as an expert in detecting and preventing this type of fraud. 6 months later, I stood before a congressional subcommittee investigating insurance fraud, explaining how sophisticated criminal networks exploit the trust and reputation of honest professionals. The testimony I gave helped pass new legislation requiring better documentation standards and protection for employees who uncover fraud. Madison and her uncle were sentenced to 15 and 22 years in federal prison, respectively. The network they'd built collapsed completely, and the money was recovered and returned to the insurance companies that had been defrauded. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came during Madison's sentencing hearing. As she stood before the judge, no longer the confident manipulator, but a scared woman facing decades behind bars, she looked directly at me sitting in the gallery. Her expression wasn't angry or defiant. It was confused, almost bewildered, as if she still couldn't understand how her perfect plan had fallen apart so completely. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked back at her steadily, the way I'd looked at her during those weeks when she thought she was destroying my life. Because the truth is, revenge in real life doesn't look like dramatic confrontations or public humiliation. It looks like meticulous documentation, quietly vindicating the innocent. It looks like criminals facing the natural consequences of their own choices. It looks like justice served not through passionate speeches, but through patient professional investigation that reveals the truth. That evening, I sat in my new office, looking out at the Phoenix skyline as the sun set behind the mountains. On my desk sat a thank you letter from one of the investigators in Ohio, whose career I'd helped save, and a commendation from the FBI for my assistance in their ongoing investigations. Madison had tried to steal my reputation, my career, and my freedom. Instead, she'd inadvertently made me stronger, more respected, and more successful than I'd ever imagined possible. The best revenge, as it turns out, was simply being exactly who I'd always been, thorough, honest, and impossible to fool for very long. Sometimes, the people who try to destroy you end up destroying themselves instead. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to watch it happen from the corner office they thought should have been theirs.